Shepherd's Seminary. I had them in Jordan at the same time as Lighthouse. And so for the Jordan's part of it, we put the two groups together, and they traveled together in Jordan. This seminary, Shepherd's Seminary, is the main professor that I know from there, a guy named Doug Bookman, who's very much a mentor of mine, very well-known New Testament scholar. So I've been working with his students from Shepherd's for many, many years, showing them around when they come over. And then another guy, Dr. Sigler, who's a Hebrew professor at Moody, and he would have his groups come over, and I would show those groups around for many, many years. And I always was complaining to them, why don't Christian schools, why don't seminaries, why don't the Christians get involved with archaeology? What's wrong with us? Why don't we get involved in these things? And I was complaining all the time, and ended up that Dr. Sigler switched from Moody over to Shepherd's and became the head of the seminary of where Bookman was. And so I was complaining, why didn't anybody do anything? Everybody's sitting around doing it. And then finally they said, okay, we'll do it. We'll do it at Shepherd's. We'll start an archaeology department. We'll bring you on as an adjunct professor. And then I went, uh-oh. Well, what have I done? And so anyways, that's what happened. So in that last trip, which seems like a long time ago, we had those two groups together, and we went to the area of Sodom and Gamorah. This is in the Bible what is called the cities of the plain. Big agricultural area on the southeast side of the Dead Sea. And so this is really where we are hoping to do our project. We prayed together, the church and the seminary, on the site of Sodom on that trip. And so the plan was to put in for a permit. That is exactly where it is today, still in exactly the same place, because as you know, between then and now was this thing called the pandemic, right? And so it shut everything down. And
Sorry. Leaned against it and shoved it on you.
Pursue that. So right now, actually, this month, we've been in communication with the Antiquity Department in Jordan, but we're actually this month submitting that permit that we were talking about back then. And so we hope to have 2 seasons in by now, but as is, that's not going to happen, but we hope that it's going to start. So what I just pulled together was some pictures from this area, so that just to give you an idea of what this area is like. It's really an amazing area. And so I'll just go through those. I'm going to step off to the side here so that I can see the slides myself. Okay, so Genesis chapter 10, verse 19 is giving us the boundaries of Canaan, ancient Canaan, and it's telling us that the western boundary is from Sidon to Tyre, and then it says, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon, that's on the coast, in the direction of Gerar, as far as Gaza. So you go from Sidon, we'll look at a map in a second, as far as Gaza, then you stop. And then you turn for the southern boundary of Canaan, and it says, and in the direction, and here are the cities of the plain that are listed out, Sodom, Gamorah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. Okay, so if we go to the next slide here, we can see, well, we don't get too much of an idea of it from this slide as far as where Gaza, well, you can see Gaza up there. You see Gaza, and the way to the north is Sidon. So the western boundary is, of course, the Mediterranean Sea, all the way down to Gaza. And then from Gaza, you turn for the southern border in the direction of Sodom and Gamorah and Admah and Zeboim. And so these areas are, we know from the Bible that they're at the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea, Sodom as it calls it, Yam Sodom, the Salt Sea, and we know that they are south of Jerusalem. Ezekiel 16:46 tells us that Sodom is south of Jerusalem, and we know that they are east of Gaza. And so archaeologically, it took a long time because this area was really remote, but these cities were found. If we go to the next slide here, we have 5 cities listed, and that particular one, the city Zoar, isn't listed, but it is in later lists. And so we have these 5 archaeological sites right next to the Dead Sea on the southeast side. The name of them is Babadra up to the north, which is the biggest site. You can see the Dead Sea there coming down to its southern point. And then Numerah. Numerah is Gamorah, and actually, I'm not going to go into it, but Numerah preserves the name Gamorah. Gamorah. And there's an explanation for that, but I'm not going to give it right now. But anyway, Safi is Zoar, and we have this on the oldest map known, the Madaba map. Some of you might know about that. Then we have Zoar, that Lot flees to. Zoar in Hebrew means little. He asked to go to this little town, which is called Bela, and from then on they call it Zoar. And then Pipha and Kamasi are these 2 ruins. We're not sure which one is Admah, which one is Zeboim, but they're one or the other. And so the one that is Pipha is the one that we're specifically putting in a permit for to dig. The reason why is it's never been excavated. As we'll see, Babadra and Numerah and Zoar have been excavated. They still need further work, but they have at least been excavated. So to excavate at Pipha would allow us to excavate one of these cities of the plain that hasn't been excavated, and it would get our skin in the game. It would get us involved. And so I'm just going to go through just a few of these. We'll start at the north, up at Babadra, and work our way down. We can go on to the next one there. So it says in Genesis 18:20, then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. Then Yahweh rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew these cities and the entire plain. Very interesting concept from an archaeological view, because very much so when you're digging into a tell, right, a stack of these cities here, what stands out, the layer that stands out the most is the burn destruction. And so here we're not just talking about a burn destruction in a city at one level, one layer in the city. We're talking about a burn destruction that's over an entire plain. This plain is like 25 miles long and 15 miles wide. It's this huge area that the Bible says burned in ancient times. So the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. If you're looking for something archaeologically, man, this is the one to look for, right? I mean, it's huge. And so 27, early the next morning, Abram got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from the furnace. And as a reminder, you'll remember that Lot, his nephew, is in Sodom with his family, and then the angels come and they pull him out of there. And he asks, they say, you can go up to the mountains. And he's like, I'm too old to go up to the mountains. Can I go to this little town over here? This little town of Bela. Okay, I'll spare that town for you. And so he and his daughters end up in that town, Zoar. Okay, so we'll start up on the north. This is Sodom. This is the site of Babadra. It's kind of hard to see because most tells are really defined, right? You can see them really, there's an ancient city, and you're like, oh yeah, that's an ancient city. Well, the reason they're so defined is because you have one city built on top of another, on top of another over a long, long occupation, a long period of time, which makes this wonderful, big, huge tell that's very distinct. These sites aren't like that. These sites aren't distinct. They're like a tell that had its growth stunted, right? Because it existed early on, and then it was burned by fire and then not occupied again. So you kind of see that mound to the left of the wadi, the ravine going through there. I want to pay attention. You can see the green in the background. That's the agricultural plain that the Bible is talking about, still used agriculturally today, because the water from up high in the high country drains down into the lowest place on earth, the Dead Sea, and so it's actually a very wet area. It hardly ever rains down there, but it comes flowing in from where it does rain up in the high country. And this is the site of Baba Dra. We can go to the next site. Now you're looking down on it. You see a wall up at the top there with a gate preserved in it. You can kind of see down through there with the drone shot the houses and things. It's been a long time since it's been excavated, and so it's kind of filled back in. A lot of the site is slid off into the ravine there. We can go to the next one. There's just another shot of it. What I want you to look at is, you see the road that's going next to it, and then on the other side of the road there's this little area that kind of looks like Swiss cheese. You see that? It's got little pits in it, and we're about to blow that up in the next slide here. So you see that's the site of Baba Dra up in that left-hand corner, and then you see on the right-hand side of the road all these pits in the ground, and then this is a guy named Paul Lapp was the director of the school, the archaeology school in Jerusalem, and he noticed all these intact pots coming into the antiquity market in Jerusalem, and he was like, man, they just flooded in to the market there, and he was like, where the heck are all these intact pots coming from? And he traced it back to these pits are from the cemetery of Baba Dra. It's a massive cemetery with these family tombs with many, many people buried in each tomb. They estimate that there's about 20,000 plus tombs, and they estimate that it's about 500,000 people are buried in this cemetery across the modern road, and that modern road follows where the ancient route went as well. So you have just a huge burial. That's a closer view where you can see why are these pits? What are these pits there for? Because the locals for, over like 100 years have been going in and digging these graves and getting the pots out of them and then going and selling them in the antiquity market. So these are robbed out. And so Paul Lapp ended up going in the 1960s and excavating, starting not in the site but in the cemetery. And he started excavating this site. We can go to the next one. And that's Paul Lapp to the right there that did the excavations. You can go to the next one. That's his map of the cemetery and the specific tombs that they dug. And a cemetery is in layers, just like a tell, right? A city is in layers. The cemetery itself is also in archaeological layers, and so they found a very strange phenomenon. We can go to the next slide. That's their camp when they're doing the excavation. The next one. So this is out of his excavation report, what Paul Lapp is writing as they're excavating. He says, a curious feature was found in all the latest charnel houses. Now, a charnel house is the type of burials that they were using when the cemetery use came to an end. And so imagine a mud adobe house, right? Build a mud adobe house and then bury your dead inside of it, and that's what a charnel house basically is. He said, a curious feature was found in all the latest charnel houses still in use up to the end of the early Bronze III city. That's the time of Abraham and Lot. In nearly every case, these mortuary buildings contained a large deposit of ash. What? Especially in the sections nearest the doorway. Our team has puzzled over this phenomenon for several years, and several possible explanations have been offered. One, of course, would be cremation. But this seems unlikely since the burning was done at one time. It shouldn't be such a mystery. You just got to go look in the Bible, and the Bible tells you what happened, right? Why these cemeteries, these tombs in the cemetery would be burned. Okay, we can go to the next one. This is a charnel house that he's talking about, one of the ones that he excavated. And you see inside the remains of the dead, and they're charred. The bones, the roof is burned through. Fire came in through the door, and so you have burned bones, and the contents of the tomb have all been burned. Then he went over later and excavated Babadra, the site itself where the city is. And guess what? There's a burn destruction over the city, which brought the city to an end, never reoccupied. But that same burn destruction is also over the cemetery. If you're an army, right, you go attack the city, but you don't go attack the cemetery. That would be crazy. And so, yeah, it's just an amazing phenomenon to have these burned tombs in the cemetery. We go on. And the bones, you see how warped the bones is. And so he says, heat deformed long bones from G1 charnel house. And so the bones suffered such heat that it warped them. And that's what he's showing in this picture. You see the burn destruction over there to the left. That covers the entire city of Babadra, brings it to an end, never re-inhabited. And then you see the fire destruction also covering the entire cemetery, bringing the use of that cemetery to an end because the city burned, the people died. There's no need to bury anybody anymore. Okay, so that's Babadra, Sodom. He ended up dying young through an accident, and two of his students ended up taking over. They did a big survey of the area, and so you see some ruins just up the hill to the right here, next to this wadi that comes out. I want you to notice in this ravine called the wadi in the Middle East, do you see that there's water flowing today? There's actually water flowing next to Sodom. This is Gamorah. There's water flowing next to the site of Gamorah to this day, which is amazing because these sites haven't been occupied for 4,000 years. And that just doesn't happen in the Middle East. Where you have water, you have people, you have occupation. And so you see right over here, up on top of the hill there, I'll blow it up, it'll be closer in a second, but I just want to say that just in the distance there is where Zoar is as well. So this is Gamorah. Those are the ruins of Gamorah there that you're seeing with the Wadi Gamorah to the left, Gamorah. And so they also excavated this site. So we can go to the next one. There blows up the ruins. You can see them better there. Also, a lot of this is slid off into the Wadi, into the ravine as well. So here's a tower before it was excavated in Gamorah. And they excavated Gamorah, this tower, this particular tower, and then underneath it they had these skeletons that were found that were preserved. Okay, now everywhere else in Gamorah, when you're there, you just kick the ground like this, and ash flies up. There's just a little bit of dust over the top, and ash flies up, and there's human remains all over the place. I have some pictures of this phenomenon from FIFA, but I don't know how else to explain it. It looks like people exploded. And so the city is destroyed, and there's just pieces of human bone all over the place, except where the tower collapsed on them, which means the tower collapsed on them. It's the tower collapsing on them that preserved their bodies. Then the fire came down, burned everything else up, and the skeletons intact were preserved underneath it. Very interesting for the interpretation of this. But here's what the excavator Rast says. He says, in the author's opinion, the evidence of these two early Bronze III cities of Babadra and Gamorah may well be reflected in the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible. This is a secular minded scholar, and so for you say that, I mean, he's like, wow, I mean, and he believes, well, there maybe was a legend that the biblical writers, he's not giving too much credit to the Bible, but he can't deny the correlation between these. So this is what he says too: the burnt debris covering the site has appeared in almost every area excavated. Again, this is Gamorrah. And it raises important questions. Was the town attacked by enemies? And if so, who were they? Or was the cause some sort of disaster, perhaps an earthquake, which set off fires in all parts of the town? By the way, these are ancient towns. They're made of mud, brick, and rock. You know, there's no gas pipes going through them, so that when there's an earthquake, the whole city burns. You have to, if you're going to burn a city like this in ancient times, it's got to be very intentional. It takes a lot of work to burn these cities anyways. Whatever the cause, it was certainly a tragedy. The skeletons of 2 adult male victims were found embedded in burnt debris next to the tower. That's what we just looked at. The result of this final tragedy is that numerous cultural items have been unusually preserved at Gamorah, sealed exactly as they were in the last days of the town's existence. This is like Pompeii, right? Pompeii, the volcano goes off and the people are killed and they're still in the same places as when they're found. The same kind of phenomenon is here at Gamorah. Most of the houses had their doorways with door sockets still in place, pottery laid everywhere, often restorable since it was broken in its original place. Now listen to this. He says, obviously the town suffered a severe fire and it was forever abandoned. Let's look at the next one. What does the Bible say about it? Jeremiah 49, here's Jeremiah preaching to, prophesying to the people of his day. Jeremiah lived during the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, right, that we were just talking about earlier, and he says, as when Sodom and Gamorah and their neighboring cities were overthrown, says the Lord, no man shall dwell there, no man shall sojourn in her. These cities were destroyed, and the Bible says they were never, ever lived in again. The archaeologist dug it. What did he say? These cities were destroyed by fire and never, ever lived in again, despite the fact that water is flowing right next to them, and that this is an agricultural plain being fed with water. It's from an archaeological standpoint, it's really bizarre. And so the culprit, what is the culprit? What causes fire? We find the fire left behind, but what caused it? And so there's a display in one of the museums in Jordan that talks about this, and it talks about these sulfur balls, and the archaeologists that excavated these sites talked about these sulfur balls. And so I saw these and I was like, man, I gotta find me some of them sulfur balls, right? So I'm looking for these sulfur balls at these sites in the burn destruction, and I can't find any to save my life. And so finally on this last trip, that lighthouse at the seminary was on, we had a geologist with us, a PhD in geology that's on our team. And so he looked at him and he said, and I told him just what I told you, and he said, oh yeah, you wouldn't find these on the sites. I was like, why not? He said, because they don't preserve in the air. The only place they preserve is when they hit water. So the ones that hit plain would have dissolved, but the ones that hit the Dead Sea would have been preserved in the Dead Sea. So he told me to go and look where the Dead Sea is receding quite quickly these days. So look in the area where the Dead Sea is receding, and you'll find the sulfur balls. And so sure enough, I went and looked in those areas. I found a bunch of sulfur balls with some of the guys that I was with, and we all had the sulfur balls, and so that's where you find them. You can catch them on fire with a lighter. You can do this scratch and sniff thing, smell like sulfur, because they're sulfur balls. Okay, so this is the site of Phypha, and I put in pictures of this particular site because this is the particular city of the plain, either Admah or Zeboim, that we are putting in for specifically a permit. Which, by the way, when usually you're going to explore the time of Abraham and Lot, archaeologically, it means you got to go find a city that was occupied at that time, and it's usually occupied through all these other. Then you got to dig for years and years and seasons and blood and sweat and tears to get down finally, eventually, to your little area of getting down to Abraham and Lot. It's unheard of to have a site from the time of Abraham and Lot that you just go like that and the ash flies up from that time period. So literally there's a about that much to dig before we get to the time of Abraham and Lot. So the next shot shows the Fifa, it's called, either Admah or Zeboim. And so you see also there is a cemetery associated with this site. And the next slide, you see the agricultural plain out there again with the green coming out from this wadi. And you see the city area over to the right, surrounded by a cemetery. And so this one also, in the next slide you'll see it also has a tower. Right? A tower that looks just like the tower, the one that was at Gamorah that they excavated, that they found the bodies preserved under. This one has this whole site is unexcavated. And so this particular tower, now stay right there for a minute. This tower also is unexcavated, but look what's laying on the surface. If you look through there, you can see the black. The black is the burn, the ash, and all this pottery is just laying around black. Some locals did a little dig thing over there and pulled this pottery that you see out there. But look, do you see all the white? That's all human bone. Like I said, that looks like people literally exploded. I don't know how else to explain it. The next shot, same thing. See that all that human bone. And then as you go and look, you can look on the side where the people have been digging, and you see it's all embedded in the ash and the destruction layer. All this human bone. So we would like to excavate that site. You see over here kind of what it looks like. You see the black burned ash, and then you see on the left the human bones sticking out a little bit in the thing, and then I pulled, kind of helped some of them out of the soil there, and you see, so we're just, I mean, you don't find this kind of phenomenon all over the place. You only find it in this agricultural plain. And it's not a mystery because we can just read in the Bible what happened there. And then what we're looking at makes sense. If you take that away and look for some other explanation, what would be the other explanation that would cause a whole agricultural plain to burn 4,000 years ago? Doesn't make any sense. That's one of our friends who, when we were there, he thought he found a pot, but it was part of a skull. So let's go back. Let's go back to there. One thing that really makes this archaeology project really intriguing to me is you probably notice I like to use archaeology not just as a defense. I mean, it's important, right, apologetically, a defense of what I believe. Certainly, we want to give reasons for what we believe, and in a secular, very secular world we live in, right, that becomes more and more secular, it seems, every day, to give the secular mind reasons for what we believe. It's good to bring some evidence for those who think with that kind of godless worldview, but also from an offensive standpoint of spreading the gospel message. That's what I use archaeology for most, is to try to persuade those who don't believe to believe in the hope that God gives us. And so that's why I'm really fascinated archaeologically and gospel-oriented with this plain, because the reality is that people alive in the world today are in the same exact situation as those people were in that were living in this plain and in these cities 4,000 years ago. And it's a great way to talk about it, that the Bible says that the world is going to be destroyed by fire. If you want to know how to escape that, then pay attention to this story and how Lot escapes that by God's mercy. And so anyways, it's just a really interesting sight. I've had unbelievers there, talking to them at these sites and contemplating these things. And it's really a rich site for that kind of discussion. One thing that's difficult with the unbeliever, right, is that it's hard to breach into the subject of spiritual things and to talk about the Bible. It's quite easy when you're standing in a site that the Bible's talking about, and you're talking about the Bible, and you're talking about spiritual things. So the next slide. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this is how Lot gets delivered. Oh, what the heck. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city Sodom is punished." When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand in the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, where the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." He said to him, "Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." That is why the town was called Zoar, little. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Okay, so if you look at the first chapter in my book, I cover the site of Mamre. And Mamre is where Abraham is with the Lord and with the angels, right? And he's pleading. Remember his pleas? What if there's 50 righteous men? Will you spare that city? And what if there's 40? And he's whittling and, typical Middle Eastern bartering going on here, and he's going down. Well, that's related then to how Lot is saved, because Lot is too old to run up to the mountain, so he has to go to a little town. And on the account of 1 righteous, or maybe 3 righteous, including his daughters, the Lord spares this entire little town. And it's a great act of mercy and great grace from the Lord. And so that's how Lot survives and his daughters. This is a shot looking down on the cemetery of Zoar. If you keep that up there, just off to the left there is the ruins of Zoar, which have been excavated, but not down to the level of Abraham and Lot. They haven't gone that deep. It's by a Greek archaeologist named Politis, and so we are hoping to also work with him. So there's Islamic ruins, and then there's Roman ruins, and then way down underneath there is the ruins from Lot's time period. Why is that? Because Zoar is the only city of the plains that continues to be a city, that continues to be occupied, because the Lord spares it on behalf of Lot and his daughters. And so, and this cemetery that you see here, even though it's a little town, it's a massive cemetery, because the cemetery continues in use. These other cemeteries with these other sites, when the city is burned, the cemetery is burned, all of it ceases to be used, the cemetery. Only here at Zoar, the cemetery continues from the early Bronze to the Middle Bronze to the Late Bronze to the Iron Age to into the Greek and Roman periods, into the Christian period, into the Islamic period. This city continues to be occupied, and this cemetery continues in use. I think we'll go in a little closer so that you can see it. There you see the cemetery, and probably the next one a little closer. And you see that kind of disturbed area there. That's a trail that's around it. This is where, from the time Constantine took over, conquered the eastern side of the Roman Empire, and became the sole Caesar over the western and eastern side of the empire. And then at this point begins what's called the Byzantine Christian era. And these graves here are from that period. And some of the grave markers that have been excavated there, that are on display in a museum, say that they were buried at Zoar. And so again, the cemetery continues. So we go to the next one. So now we can end with some of these. Unless the Lord Almighty had left us some survivors, we would have become like Sodom. We would have been like Gamorah. So think about what we just went through. Isaiah's contemporary with Hezekiah and with the Assyrian conquest, right? So when Isaiah is giving thanks for God's deliverance of Jerusalem and the remnant that was preserved inside those walls, what does he say? Unless Yahweh Almighty had delivered us, if God hadn't delivered us and put the 185,000 Assyrian soldiers to death, we would have become like Sodom and Gamorah. We wouldn't exist. There would be no such thing as Jews in the earth if that would have happened. And so he's giving thanks that Jerusalem did not become like Sodom and Gomorrah, even though it deserved to. It deserved to because of the wickedness that had come to, the wickedness that was in Sodom and Gomorrah had come to Jerusalem. But Isaiah is giving thanks for being spared. Matthew 11, this is what Jesus says. Those of you who have been with me on trips, remember Capernaum is on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. This is the headquarters for Jesus' ministry. And so it's a Jewish town. Sodom and Gomorrah and Zeboim and Admah and Zoar are Canaanite. Capernaum is Jewish, remnant of Israel. And this is what Jesus says to them. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted up? Will you be lifted to the heavens? No, you will go down to Hades. For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you that it will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. Wow, what a heavy thing to consider. That if all those miracles that happened in Capernaum, where they dug through the roof of the house and lowered the paralytic down and he was healed, for example, to the healing of the centurion's daughter, and on and on and on, all these miracles, if those had been done in Sodom, it would not have been destroyed by fire and laid there. It's a sobering thing to think about when you're walking around looking at the ashes and the remains of those people. This statement made about Capernaum. 2 Peter, if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, for that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to hold the unrighteous for punishment on the day of judgment. Very good verse to use in the way things are going on earth today, wouldn't you say? And therefore, these sites are pertinent to again, what we were talking about earlier. These are real. We're talking about reality here. We're talking about the consequence of evil and the mercy of God to rescue those who will put their trust in Him out of that. And so I think that might be it. Yeah, so that just gives you an idea then, a quick idea of what we're hoping to do. Now I want to stress,